Here is a sentence you have not seen in Nigerian political reporting. One political party, 3 factions, 3 presidential candidates, a deregistration court order pending on appeal, a Supreme Court directive to go back to the Federal High Court, and a warning from the party's own Adamawa ally, the former secretary to the government of the Federation, alleging that the presidential primary was massively rigged. That is where the ADC is today. And sitting in the middle of all of it is Atiku Abubakar, who has run for president of Nigeria 6 times and who is now being told in a formal signed statement to desist with immediate effect from calling himself the ADC's candidate. While everyone is talking about which ADC faction is legitimate, nobody is asking the question that determines whether any of this matters. Does INEC recognize a presidential candidate from a party under a deregistration court order, even if that order is under appeal? Because the answer to that question determines whether Atiku has a 2027 campaign or a 2027 legal battle. If you're new here, this channel exists for one reason: to give Nigerians the political analysis mainstream media won't. Hit subscribe and stay with me. This gets deeper.
On Wednesday, July 1, 2026, the ADC faction, led by its self-described national chairman, Nafiu Gombe, issued a formal statement with 4 core assertions. 1. Atiku Abubakar is not and has never been the ADC's presidential candidate. 2. The David Mark-led National Working Committee is an unauthorized body with no constitutional or legal standing to act for the party. 3. The Gombe faction has already completed all internal processes required under the party's constitution and the Electoral Act 2026 and has duly nominated Professor Chris Uba as its presidential candidate. And 4. The ADC is not in any alliance, merger, or coalition with any other political party and is contesting 2027 on its own structure and manifesto. The statement issued a formal and final warning to Atiku to desist from holding himself out as the ADC's candidate and described the party as not being a rental platform or a special purpose vehicle for political opportunists, displaced individuals, or coalition actors. The Gombe statement describes a 2-faction dispute, Gombe versus Mark. The more complete picture, confirmed across multiple independent analyses, including commentary by Ruben Abati in multiple major outlets, is that the ADC has 3 competing factions, each with their own presidential candidate. The David Mark-led NWC faction, presenting Atiku Abubakar as presidential candidate, with former Senate President Mark as the faction's operational leader. The Nafiu Gombe faction, presenting Professor Chris Uba as presidential candidate, zoning the ticket to southern Nigeria. The Dumebi Kachiku faction, presenting Kachiku himself as presidential candidate. In addition, the ADC's presidential primary produced 3 named contestants: Atiku, who polled 1,846,370 votes, Rotimi Amache, 504,117 votes, and Mohammed Hayatuddin, 177,120 votes. Both Amache and Hayatuddin rejected the results and boycotted the official declaration ceremony, alleging widespread irregularities. Babachir Lawal, former SGF and Atiku's Adamawa political ally, resigned from ADC entirely, publicly alleging that the primary was massively rigged in Atiku's favor. The Gombe faction statement comes at a specific juncture in the legal and political timeline. On April 30, 2026, the Supreme Court set aside the Court of Appeal's status quo order in the ADC leadership dispute and directed the parties back to the Federal High Court for expedited hearing. INEC, which had previously derecognized the Mark-led leadership following a Court of Appeal order, complied with the Supreme Court by reversing its derecognition, restoring the Mark-led leadership on its official portal. This INEC reversal is the event the Gombe fact is specifically reacting to. By formally issuing this statement, the Gombe faction is putting its counterclaim on the public record and building its case for the Federal High Court expedited hearing that must now follow. Layered over all of this is the June 15, 2026 Federal High Court deregistration order against the ADC and 4 other opposition parties, issued by Justice Peter Lifu over INEC's own objection, following a suit by the National Forum of Former Legislators. That order is on appeal, with the ADC's lawyers arguing the Court of Appeal's pre-existing stay order made the Lifu judgment potentially void. But it creates an overarching existential legal threat to the party that makes the intra-ADC faction dispute feel, to outside observers, somewhat academic. Under Nigerian electoral law and INEC's party registration framework, INEC recognizes one official leadership structure per registered party.
That recognition determines whose primary results are valid, whose candidates are certified, and whose officers can act on behalf of the party in relation to INEC's administrative processes. As of today, following INEC's compliance with the Supreme Court's April 30 order, the David Mark-led NWC is restored on INEC's official portal, meaning INEC formally recognizes Mark's faction as the legitimate ADC leadership. What the Gombe faction statement is doing, legally and institutionally, is building the record for the Federal High Court expedited hearing that the Supreme Court ordered. The Gombe faction needs a court ruling, not a press statement, that establishes its NWC as the constitutionally legitimate organ. Until that ruling comes, INEC's portal position is what determines practical authority. The June 15 LIFU deregistration order creates a specific complication for the leadership dispute. If the ADC is ultimately deregistered, if the Court of Appeal upholds the LIFU judgment rather than voiding it on stay order grounds, then the question of which faction's leadership is legitimate becomes moot. There would be no ADC to lead. The ADC's lawyers are arguing the June 15 judgment is void because the Court of Appeal had issued a stay of proceedings. If that argument succeeds, the deregistration is reversed and the leadership dispute becomes central again. If it fails, the entire leadership dispute dissolves into irrelevance. This is why, as Ruben Abati's analysis captured, whether Nigeria's 2027 elections are determined by voters or by courts is not rhetorical. The ADC's 2027 trajectory will be determined by at least 3 concurrent court processes: the deregistration appeal, the leadership dispute at the FHC, and any pre-election petitions arising from contested primaries. The Supreme Court directed the ADC leadership dispute back to the Federal High Court for expedited hearing. The Federal High Court judge who must now hear this case is Justice Peter Lifu, the same judge who on June 15 issued the order deregistering the ADC. Whether Lifu recuses himself from the leadership hearing, whether either faction applies for him to do so, and whether the appearance of conflict creates an additional layer of appeals are questions that have not been publicly settled at this production date. This is a live institutional ambiguity that deserves explicit on-camera treatment.
Atiku Abubakar has contested the Nigerian presidency in 1993 as VP candidate, 2007, 2011, 2015, 2019, and 2023. Each time, he has built national structures, donor networks, and political alliances. His current ADC strategy, emerging from the Mark faction primary with 1,846,370 votes, is the most recent chapter in that multi-decade project. His calculation is that the David Mark faction's INEC portal recognition, restored by the Supreme Court's April 30 compliance directive, gives him the institutional platform that matters, the one INEC formally recognizes. The Gombe faction statement, in Atiku's strategic calculus, is the noise that surrounds any contested party primary, opposition noise that will be settled by courts rather than by press statements. His political team's calculation is that the legal track, with INEC currently recognizing their faction, favors them more than the Gombe faction's alternative narrative. The Gombe faction strategy is to build a public record, press statements, court filings, INEC communications, that positions it as the authentic ADC. Its presidential primary produced Chris Uba. Its statement argues its processes were conducted in strict compliance with the ADC Constitution and the Electoral Act 2026 as guided by INEC. By zoning the presidential ticket to southern Nigeria, the Gombe faction is also making a structural argument. It is offering a balanced national ticket that the northern candidate Atiku bid cannot match. The Gombe faction's formal warning to Atiku, described as final, is both a legal position statement and a political pressure tool. It gives the faction grounds to approach INEC with a formal objection if Mark's faction submits Atiku as the ADC's presidential candidate, and it creates a paper trail the FHC expedited hearing can reference. The third faction, the Dumebi Kachiku faction, with Kachiku as presidential candidate, receives the least media attention but is not politically negligible. Kachiku is a credible professional figure who ran a presidential campaign in 2023. His ADC faction's existence means that even within the Gombe versus Mark binary that most reporting uses, there is a third claimant whose position in any court-ordered reconciliation or merger must be addressed. The Kachiku faction's silence in response to the Gombe statement and its relationship to INEC's portal recognition is a signal worth watching. Former SGF Babachir Lawal's resignation and rigging allegations are the most politically significant development in the Atiku NSC story that is not being covered with adequate weight. Lawal is not a casual observer. He is an Adamawa politician, a former ally of both Atiku and the APC, with direct knowledge of how Nigerian party primaries are conducted. His specific allegation that the primary was massively rigged in Atiku's favor comes from someone with the regional credibility to make that allegation stick in northern political circles. His departure is a signal to northern political actors who are watching the ADC as a potential 2027 coalition platform. The vehicle may not be as clean as its presentation suggested.
The ADC's internal crisis is directly relevant to the 2027 opposition consolidation project. The central rationale for Atiku's ADC candidacy was that it provided a unified platform for opposition forces that could not reach agreement under PDP or LP banners. A unified platform requires a credible, undisputed institutional home. An ADC with 3 factions, 3 candidates, disputed primaries, a deregistration court order, and competing INEC recognition claims is not that home. It is, as Gombe's statement unwittingly concedes, a special purpose vehicle, which is precisely the description Atiku's critics have used to characterize his use of the party. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything.
Reuben Abati's widely circulated commentary stated plainly, whether we like it or not, Nigeria's 2027 general elections will be determined by the courts, not by the voters. The ADC situation is Exhibit A. The PDP also has 2 factions and 2 presidential candidates, the Wike faction with Senator Sandy Ono and the Kabiru Turaki faction with President Goodluck Jonathan. The SDP has 2 factions. Even Accord, following its own contested position, has had leadership questions. What is happening is not isolated party management failure. It is a systemic feature of Nigeria's party system, in which parties are institutionally weak, personality-driven, and structurally designed to fracture under the pressure of high-stakes candidacy contests. The national implication is this: when multiple major opposition parties are simultaneously fighting leadership disputes through courts rather than internal democracy, INEC's calendar becomes hostage to litigation timelines that courts alone control. Candidate filing deadlines, campaign periods, and ultimately the election itself become vulnerable to legal maneuverings that individual judges, some of whose impartiality is itself disputed, determine. The Gombe faction specifically references the Electoral Act 2026 as the framework governing its primaries. This is a newly enacted electoral act passed after the 2023 elections, which has already generated implementation disputes. One of its provisions relates to how parties conduct direct primaries, a model the ADC adopted, and what constitutes a valid electoral exercise under its terms. Whether the courts will apply the 2026 Act's provisions consistently across all 3 ADC factions' primaries is a legal question that the FHC expedited hearing must answer. Atiku's candidacy on any platform represents a Northern Muslim presidency bid. His primary opponents within the ADC, Amache, Southern Christian, and Hayatuddin, Northern Muslim Alternative, both rejected his victory. The Gombe faction zoned its presidential ticket to the south, producing Chris Uba. The ADC's internal contestation therefore also reflects the ongoing North-South presidential succession debate that runs underneath all 2027 political calculations. A fractured ADC that cannot produce a unified Southern or Northern opposition candidate weakens the structural case for using the ADC as the 2027 opposition platform, regardless of who wins the leadership dispute.
Atiku Abubakar's multiple presidential campaigns have been substantially funded and supported by Nigerian diaspora communities, particularly Hausa Fulani and broader northern Nigerian professional networks in the UK, the US, and Canada. Financial contributions, political advocacy, and international lobbying for Atiku's candidacy have been consistent across his campaigns since 2007. Those communities are now watching his 6th presidential campaign proceed on a platform with 3 competing factions, a deregistration court order, a disputed primary, and a resignation by his own Adamawa ally alleging rigging. For diaspora supporters who have already contributed to the 2027 campaign, the question is practical. Are their contributions going to a viable candidacy or to a legal battle over party platform legitimacy? The distinction matters financially and emotionally for communities that have made repeated investments in Atiku's political project. International observers and election analysts who have followed Nigerian opposition politics across multiple cycles will recognize the pattern. Atiku's campaigns consistently begin with a coalition-building narrative that generates significant momentum and funding, encounter internal party and primary disputes that create factionalism, and then face a legal and political consolidation challenge that either resolves in his favor or fails and requires another cycle. The ADC 2027 situation follows this documented pattern precisely. Whether this cycle breaks it or extends it is the question international observers are watching. For the African Union and ECOWAS, which monitor Nigerian democratic processes with particular attention given Nigeria's regional influence, the spectacle of multiple major opposition parties simultaneously fighting 3-way leadership and candidacy disputes through courts rather than internal democracy is an indicator of institutional party weakness that democratic assessment frameworks flag. A 2027 Nigerian presidential election that is preceded by this level of court-determined opposition architecture sends a signal not about specific candidates, but about the structural health of Nigeria's multi-party democracy that both regional and international monitoring bodies will note in their pre-election assessment reports.
The most defensible version of Atiku's position is this. He contested and won a presidential primary. His faction, the MARC-led NWC, is currently recognized on INEC's official portal following the Supreme Court's April 30 compliance directive. He polled nearly 1.85 million votes in a direct primary that, disputed or not, produced a documented outcome. The disputes, from this perspective, are the normal turbulence of Nigerian party politics. The institutional recognition from INEC is the one that legally matters. As long as INEC recognizes the MARC faction's NWC, Atiku can legitimately present himself as the ADC's candidate for INEC administrative purposes. The Gombe faction's final warning is legally significant only if a court upholds it, which has not happened. Misconceptions in public discourse. 1. The ADC faction dispute is simply about Gombe versus MARC. There are 3 factions. The Kachiku faction is consistently overlooked, but is a real third party in the dispute with its own candidate and its own primary outcome. 2. INEC recognizing MARC's faction means Atiku is safely the ADC candidate. INEC's portal recognition can change again following a federal high court ruling. It changed once already when INEC derecognized MARC's faction after the Court of Appeal order, and was reversed again after the Supreme Court's directive. A further FHE ruling in Gombe's favor could reverse it again. INEC's current position is the result of the most recent court order in an ongoing case. It is not a final determination. 3. The deregistration court order means the ADC cannot field candidates in 2027. The deregistration order is under appeal and has not been implemented by INEC. If the Court of Appeal grants the injunction application that the ADC's lawyers filed, Atiku and other ADC candidates can contest pending the appeal outcome. The deregistration is a threat, not yet a fact. Nigeria's national interest in the 2027 election is not in any specific candidate winning. It is in the election producing a credible, competitive outcome that forces governance accountability on whichever government is formed. An opposition that is simultaneously managing 3 factions, 3 candidates, a deregistration order, disputed primaries, and a Supreme Court-ordered expedited hearing in its main party platform is structurally less able to mount the organized, disciplined campaign that forces the incumbent to genuinely compete. For Southwest Nigeria specifically, whose political strategy has historically depended on a competitive national political environment to maximize its bargaining leverage, a weakened, fragmented opposition heading into 2027 reduces the options available to Southwest political actors. A Southwest that is compelled to bet on an APC incumbent because the opposition is too chaotic to be a credible alternative is a Southwest with less leverage over the federal government regardless of which political issues it prioritizes. The ADC structural implosion is therefore not a northern problem or a southern problem. It is an accountability problem for every Nigerian region that benefits from genuine electoral competition.
The long-term significance of the ADC's three-way fracture is not in who wins the leadership dispute. It is in what the fracture tells you about the structural viability of using Nigerian registered parties as coalition vehicles for presidential ambition. Each of the 3 factions in the ADC, Atiku's MARC faction, the Gombe Uba faction, the Kachiku faction, arrived in the ADC with a political project that pre-existed the party. The ADC was a platform of convenience for each of them. That convenience model, using a registered party as a special purpose vehicle, fails under the pressure of a genuine presidential primary because the party has no institutional loyalty, no ideological center, and no membership base that mediates between competing claims. The failure is structural, not personal. Until Nigerian political parties are built from the bottom up, with genuine membership databases, ideological programs, and internal democratic cultures that pre-exist the candidacy they are organized around, this pattern will repeat. In 2027, it is happening in the ADC. In a future cycle, it will happen in whichever party the next opposition consolidation project selects as its vehicle. We opened with an arithmetic: 1 party, 3 factions, 3 presidential candidates, a deregistration order, and a Supreme Court directive to a federal high court to resolve it all expeditiously. Today, a formal warning from one of those factions told Atiku Abubakar, for the 6th time a presidential candidate, to stop calling himself the ADC's candidate. The question this video has been building towards is not who wins the faction dispute. It is whether the ADC in any confederation can provide Atiku or anyone else with the stable, credible, undisputed institutional platform that a competitive 2027 presidential campaign actually requires. On the evidence of 3 factions, a disputed primary, Babachir Lawal's departure, Ameke and Hayatuddin's boycott, and a deregistration court order, the honest answer is not yet. Ruben Abati put it plainly: Nigeria's 2027 elections may be determined by the courts, not the voters. The ADC situation is the clearest illustration of why. And until Nigerian political parties develop the institutional depth to resolve leadership and candidacy disputes through internal democracy rather than court filings, that prediction will remain the most accurate single sentence about how Nigerian presidential contests are actually decided. Drop your analysis in the comments. Do you think Atiku can build a viable 2027 campaign on the ADC platform as it currently stands? And if the deregistration order is upheld, where does he go next?
If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what's really happening. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.